The beeping of the machines was the first thing I heard when I walked into the ICU. Sharp, mechanical, relentless. Each sound was a reminder that my daughter's life was being measured in seconds and heartbeats. Emily lay on the bed, pale, motionless, her chest rising and falling under the guidance of tubes and wires. I stood at the foot of her bed, my knees weak, my hands gripping the rail as though I could anchor her back to life just by holding on. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. I whispered her name, though she couldn't hear me. Emily, Daddy's here. The nurse, Carla Nguyen, touched my shoulder gently. She made it through the surgery, Mr. Doyle, but the damage was extensive. It's still touch and go, I nodded, unable to speak. For 30 years I had worn a badge, stood at crime scenes, stared down men with guns and nothing to lose, but nothing had ever left me as hollow as seeing my little girl like this. And then came the part that turned grief into fury. Richard wasn't there. Richard Carson, her husband, the man who had promised to love her, to be her partner, to stand by her side. When Emily went into surgery, he'd been pacing the hall, complaining about how long it was taking. But now, while she lay unconscious and fighting for her life, he was nowhere to be found. I asked Carla, "Where's Richard?" She hesitated. "I don't know. He left about an hour ago." Later that evening, I found out where he really was. One of Emily's friends showed me a photo she'd seen online. Richard on a yacht, glass of champagne in his hand, a woman in a red dress at his side. The caption read, "Living the dream. Number sign, no worries." Quote, I stared at the phone until my vision blurred. My daughter was barely alive and her husband was celebrating. Celebrating? I'd seen plenty of betrayal in my career, but betrayal inside your own family. That cuts the deepest. I leaned against the hospital wall, my chest tight, and forced myself to breathe. Emotions cloud judgment. I told rookies that 100 times. Stay sharp. Collect facts. Build your case. And now I had to live by my own advice. Richard wanted me to look broken. He wanted everyone to believe I was just a grieving old man who'd lost his edge. But I wasn't broken. I was taking notes, mental at first, then physical, just like I'd done on the job. I opened a small notebook I always carried in my coat pocket and wrote, March 2nd, 2025, Emily in ICU, critical. Richard absent, later seen on yacht with unknown woman. Caption, living the dream. The words steadied me. I had spent a lifetime chasing truth, and I wasn't about to stop now. When I returned to Emily's bedside, I studied her face. Even with the bruises, she was still my little girl, the one who used to run down the pier with her hair streaming, behind her shouting, "Race you, Daddy!" I thought of Margaret then, my late wife, who would have sat in this very chair holding Emily's hand, whispering prayers into her ear. I whispered one myself, though I'd never been a praying man. Margaret, if you can hear me, give her strength. And give me strength, too, because I think I'm about to walk into the fight of my life. Carla adjusted Emily's IV and looked at me quietly. "She knows you're here," she said. "Don't give up on her." "I won't," I answered. My voice was steady now. "But I'll make sure the man who left her here doesn't get away with it either." That night, when the ICU lights dimmed and the halls grew silent, I sat by Emily's bed and began to plan. I wasn't just a grieving father anymore. I was a detective again, and Richard Carson had just become my case. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital, just after dawn. The bay mist clung to my coat as I walked through the sliding glass doors, carrying a paper bag of pastries for the nurses. It was an old cop trick I'd learned years ago. Feed the people who work the hardest, and they'll feed you information in return. Carla smiled when she saw me, her tired eyes softening. "You're early, Mr. Doyle," she said, accepting the bag. Emily had a quiet night, stable, but still unconscious. Relief washed over me. One more night, survived. One more day, gifted. I made my way toward the ICU, but when I reached the entrance, a security guard stepped in front of me. He was young, maybe 30, his posture rigid, his eyes avoiding mine. "Sorry, sir," he said. "You're not on the approved visitor list today." I frowned. "Not on the list?" "I was here all night yesterday." He shifted uncomfortably. "The list changed. Orders came from administration." I felt the old detective in me stir. Calm voice, steady eyes. "Never show your hand too quickly." "Who gave those orders?" He hesitated, then muttered, "Mr. Carson. He brought papers from his attorney this morning. Says visitation has to be restricted for Emily's well-being." My jaw tightened. Of course. Richard Carson had wasted no time. While my daughter lay in a hospital bed, he was already pulling strings, cutting me out. I stepped closer to the guard, lowering my voice. "Son, let me tell you something. I was a police detective for 30 years. I know when someone's trying to hide something. If you think barring me from my daughter is going to stop me, you're mistaken. But I won't take it out on you. You're just following orders. Now step aside." The guard swallowed hard, but didn't move. Carla appeared behind him, tension in her eyes. "It's true, Frank," she said quietly. "Richard came in at 6 a.m. with a notarized letter. He told the administrators you were agitated, that your presence was upsetting Emily's recovery. He made it sound like you were unstable, my fists clenched at my sides. I had spent decades protecting the public, keeping my record clean, serving honorably. Now my own son-in-law was painting me as a liability." Carla touched my arm. "Give me a few minutes. I'll see what I can do." I stepped back, my chest burning with fury, and retreated to the waiting area. I sat in a plastic chair under flickering fluorescent lights, pulling out my notebook. In firm letters, I wrote, "March 3rd, 2025, barred from ICU by Richard Carson. Presented notarized letter claiming I was agitated, unstable, access restricted." The words steadied me, as they always did. Evidence, dates, times, facts. I wasn't just a grieving father anymore. I was building a case. Hours crawled by. I watched Richard arrive mid-morning, strolling in with a tailored suit, his tie perfectly knotted. He carried a leather briefcase, and in his other hand, his phone. Always his phone. He laughed into it, as if he were walking into a business meeting instead of the ward where his wife fought for her life. He didn't look at me as he passed. That was his way of gloating, pretending I didn't exist, as though he had already erased me. I stood slowly, following him with my eyes. "Enjoy the yacht?" I muttered under my breath. He paused just for a heartbeat, then kept walking. That tiny hitch in his stride was all I needed. He'd heard me, and he knew I knew. Later that afternoon, Carla found me in the waiting room. She sat beside me, lowering her voice. "Frank, you didn't hear this from me. But Richard's papers included a clause. He claimed medical power of attorney, said Emily signed it months ago. If that's true, he can control who visits her, what treatment she gets. Everything." I felt the blood drain from my face. Emily would never give him that kind of control. Carla's eyes were steady. Then find proof she didn't. That night I drove home, the road stretching dark and empty before me. I unlocked the front door, stepped into the silence of my house, and went straight to Helen's desk. For years she had kept copies of every important document. Birth certificates, insurance forms, even Emily's old report cards. If Emily had signed something as important as medical power of attorney, Helen would have insisted on a copy. I tore through the drawers, files spilling onto the floor. Nothing, no copy, no record. My gut told me the truth. The document Richard had was either forged or signed under pressure. I sat back in Helen's chair, my chest heavy, my hands trembling. On the wall hung a photo of her and Emily at the pier, both of them laughing, their arms around each other. I whispered into the empty room, "Helen, he's tightening the noose, but I promise you, I won't let him win. I've said it 100 times to rookies. Paper doesn't lie. People do. You can tell me any story you want, but eventually the trail of signatures, stamps, transfers, and dates will either prove it or bury it. Richard must have forgotten who I was before I became just Emily's old man. He wasn't dealing with some confused retiree. He was dealing with a man who spent 30 years following trails criminals thought were invisible. The day after I was barred from the ICU, I went back to the hospital with a different plan. Not to fight my way past security, not to beg administrators, but to look for the seams in Richard's story. Carla met me at the side entrance, her badge clipped to her scrubs. "Frank," she whispered, glancing around, "you didn't hear this from me, but I copied the document Richard submitted. It's not supposed to leave administration, but I thought you'd want to see it." She handed me a folded photocopy, her hand trembling. I tucked it into my coat before anyone saw. "You may have just saved Emily's life," I told her. Back home, under the yellow glow of Helen's old desk lamp, I spread the paper out. It was a medical power of attorney form, dated 6 months earlier, with Emily's signature at the bottom. Except the signature didn't sit right. Too clean, too mechanical. I'd watched Emily sign birthday cards, checks, lease agreements. Her signature always had a flourish on the Y, a little tail that curled upward like a smile. This one didn't. I pulled out old documents Helen had kept. Emily's marriage certificate, her college loan forms. I laid them side by side. The difference was obvious to my eye, but I needed more than instinct. So I called Anthony Vega. Anthony had been my partner for 15 years, a good cop who'd gone private after retirement. He knew how to find people who didn't want to be found, and how to read what they didn't want seen. "Frank," he said when he picked up, "I figured the next time I heard from you it'd be over beers." "Not another case." "This one's personal," I said. "My daughter." Her husband forged a medical power of attorney to cut me out. "I need a handwriting analyst, someone quick and discreet." He didn't even hesitate. "I know a guy. I'll set it up. And Frank, whatever this bastard's done, we'll bury him." While Anthony worked his end, I started pulling financial threads. Richard's world was polished, expensive. Suits, yachts, private clubs. But wealth leaves footprints, and arrogance makes them deeper. I logged into the joint bank account Emily had once shown me when she and Richard first married. She'd given me access, just in case, a habit she'd picked up from her mother. My stomach turned as I scrolled through months of transactions, wire transfers to offshore accounts, luxury purchases timed perfectly with Emily's hospital stays, withdrawals marked with cryptic memos. One memo read simply, "Custody prep." I leaned back in the chair, my jaw clenched. He wasn't just stealing from Emily while she lay in a hospital bed. He was preparing to strip Lily from me, too, using Emily's incapacitation as his excuse. That night, I added to my notebook, March 5th, 2025, examined forged power of attorney, signature inconsistent, financial transfers suggest fraud, offshore accounts, possible custody preparation. The next day, Anthony called. "I've got confirmation. Your gut was right. That signature, forged." My contact compared it against 3 verified samples. No doubt about it, I closed my eyes, relief and fury mixing like storm tides. "That's the first nail in his coffin." Anthony chuckled darkly. "Then let's start hammering." With Carla feeding me hospital records from the inside and Anthony digging into Richard's financial movements, the picture became clearer. This wasn't just betrayal. This was strategy. Richard was orchestrating a hostile takeover of his wife's life. But he made one mistake. He thought the paper trail would bury me. He forgot that I'd spent my life following trails exactly like this, and they always led straight to the guilty. When I retired from the force, I thought the hardest battles of my life were behind me. I had faced gang leaders, smugglers, and men who would shoot you for pocket change. But I was wrong. The hardest battle came in a quiet courthouse, buried in paperwork, delivered in the polished language of custody petitions. The envelope arrived by courier 2 days after I confirmed the forgery. I knew from the weight of it that it was trouble. Inside were thick documents, stamped with the seal of the county family court. Richard Carson had filed a petition for full custody of Lily. I sat at the kitchen table, my glasses perched low on my nose, and read every word carefully. His attorney had crafted it with precision. It painted Richard as the stable parent, with financial means, a successful businessman capable of providing structure and opportunity. And me? According to the petition, I was an aging widower with declining faculties, a man emotionally unstable due to grief, unfit to raise a child in a modern, healthy environment. I pressed my hands against the table to steady them. I'd read lies before, seen defense attorneys twist truth into rope to hang the innocent. But when it's your name smeared across the page, when it's your granddaughter being pulled from your arms in ink, the fury cuts deeper. I closed my eyes and pictured Lily, 7 years old, freckles across her nose, her laughter filling my house when she visited. She loved pancakes on Sundays, the way Margaret used to make them. She loved sitting in my study, spinning in my old leather chair while asking about the cases I solved. She was a piece of Emily, a piece of Margaret, a light I wasn't about to let Richard snuff out. I called Sandra Blake. No, that was the lawyer from Edward's story. Pause. Correction. Here, Frank's lawyer hadn't yet entered, so let me stay consistent. Yes, Grace Ramirez, the forensic accountant I'd been speaking with through Anthony, also connected me to an attorney she trusted. By afternoon, I was sitting across from attorney Linda Harper, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who had a reputation for cutting through smokescreens. She skimmed the custody papers quickly, then looked up at me. "This is dirty work," she said bluntly. "He's building his case on 2 pillars, your age and his money. He'll argue you're too old to raise a child, and he'll flaunt his resources as proof he can provide better." Classic play. I leaned forward. "And what about Emily? She's still alive. Doesn't she get a say?" Linda's mouth tightened. "Technically, as long as she's incapacitated, her medical proxy, Richard, according to that forged document, controls decisions. If he can prove you're unfit, the court could grant him permanent custody of Lily. Once that happens, undoing it becomes a nightmare." I felt my chest tighten, the same way it had in shootouts, the way it did when life hung on a trigger pull. Only this time the stakes weren't measured in bullets, but in bedtime stories and Sunday pancakes. Linda tapped her pen against the table. "We need to fight fire with fire. Witnesses, character statements, proof of your stability. The more people we have willing to stand in court and say you're competent, the weaker his case becomes." "I've already started," I told her. I slid my notebook across the table, pages filled with entries. The forgery, the yacht, the financial theft. I've got names, too. Carlin Guyen, a nurse who knows what Richard's been doing at the hospital. Anthony Vega, my former partner, who can vouch for my clarity. Dr. Leonard Shaw might be compromised, but Dr. Pierce? No, wait, he's from Edward's story. Here it's Dr. Leonard Shaw. Pressured but honest at heart. I'll get him to testify when the time comes. Linda scanned the entries, her eyebrows rising. Most people come in here with excuses. You came in with evidence. Mr. Doyle, you might just have more detective left in you than you realize. That night, Lily came to stay with me. Richard had allowed it for now. A temporary gesture to look magnanimous, I suppose. She curled up on the couch, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. "Grandpa," she whispered, "why doesn't Daddy come to see Mommy at the hospital?" I swallowed hard. "Sometimes people make bad choices, Lily. But Mommy knows you love her, and so do I." She drifted to sleep, trusting me completely. And as I watched her chest rise and fall, I swore to myself that no court, no lawyer, no manipulative husband would take her from me. In the morning, I opened Helen's old desk drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote in bold letters, March 7th, 2025, Richard Carson filed for full custody of Lily. Grounds, my age, alleged instability. Attorney Harper retained. Response, gather witnesses and evidence. The paper trail was growing, and with every page, I was closer to pulling Richard's entire scheme into the light. When I wore the badge, I learned quickly that official reports only told part of the story. The real truth lived in whispers, the hallway conversations, the things people noticed but didn't dare put in writing. And in hospitals, whispers carry further than any medical chart. After the custody papers arrived, I knew I couldn't just fight Richard in the courtroom. I had to undermine him at the source, the hospital, where he'd built his narrative of control. Carla Nguyen became my quiet conduit. She never spoke above a murmur, never lingered too long, but every time she passed me in the waiting room, she left crumbs of information like a trail leading me deeper. "Frank," she whispered one afternoon, sliding a folded note into my hand, "several nurses have noticed Richard bringing in documents late at night. They don't know what's in them, but they saw him arguing with Dr. Shaw." I unfolded the note later in my car. Names, dates, and brief observations were scribbled inside. One nurse claimed Richard insisted Emily had signed certain treatment forms despite her being unconscious. Another mentioned overhearing him on the phone in the hallway, muttering about liquidating assets, while his wife was still under anesthesia. None of this would ever show up in an official chart, but it painted a picture, one I intended to frame and hang in front of a judge's eyes. A few days later, I cornered Dr. Leonard Shaw outside the hospital cafeteria. He was a cautious man, his shoulders tense as though someone was always watching. "Doctor," I said quietly, "I know Richard's pressuring you. I know you've seen things that don't sit right." He avoided my eyes. "Mr. Doyle, I can't discuss patient matters with you." "Not even when patient matters cross into criminal?" I asked. My voice was calm, but I let the weight of 30 years as a detective settle in the words. His jaw tightened. He glanced around, lowered his voice. "Off the record, yes. He brought me forms claiming Emily had authorized him as sole medical proxy. I was skeptical, but the notarization was clean. Administrators told me to accept it. And yes, he's been asking about withdrawing her from certain therapies, claiming they're unnecessary expenses." My stomach turned. "Expenses?" "He's treating her recovery like a bill to be trimmed." Shaw's voice dropped further. "If you want the truth, talk to the night staff." "They've seen more than I have." "The night staff, of course. Nurses and aides who clock in when administrators go home, when Richard thinks no one's paying attention." So I began lingering at odd hours. I sat in the waiting room long past visiting hours, pretending to doze in my chair. Eventually, a young nurse named Angela sat down beside me. She looked around nervously, then whispered, "I've seen him, Mr. Doyle. He brings a woman with him sometimes, not family. She wears expensive jewelry, designer heels. They go into Emily's room together, late at night, my fists clenched, while my daughter lies unconscious." Angela nodded, her eyes full of quiet disgust. "I can't say more. I need this job. But Carla trusts you, so I trust you too." I thanked her and jotted the note into my book as soon as I got home. March 10th, 2025. Reports from nurses. Richard bringing unknown woman into ICU late at night. Staff suspicious. Dr. Shaw confirms pressure regarding therapies and proxy papers. Piece by piece, the Whisper network was filling gaps the official system refused to touch. I had the forgery confirmed, the financial irregularities documented, and now testimony that Richard was using Emily's hospital bed as a shield while flaunting his betrayal. But whispers can only do so much. To take him down, I needed a louder voice, something public, undeniable. The break came when Carla slipped me another folded note. Inside was a single line. "Check social media. Yacht photos posted again." March 9th, I logged on that night, scrolled through Richard's feeds. There he was, champagne in hand, grinning under the sun, the same woman beside him. He wasn't even careful anymore. He thought Emily's condition had given him permanent cover, that no one would dare challenge his story of being the grieving husband. But arrogance leaves footprints, and Richard Carson had just left his biggest yet. In police work, arrogance was often the fatal flaw. Criminals who thought themselves untouchable left the biggest trails. Richard Carson was no different. While Emily lay in a bed full of tubes, he couldn't resist the lure of champagne, luxury yachts, and cameras. Carla's note had been right. March 9th. I pulled up the photos that evening on Richard's public account. There he was, sunburnt and grinning, arm wrapped tightly around the woman in the red dress. Her diamond bracelet glinted in the sun as if mocking me. The caption read, "Another perfect day on the water." Blessed, living life. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Every like, every heart-shaped emoji felt like salt in an open wound. Friends congratulated him. Business contacts commented on his success. Not one word about Emily. Not one word about Lily. But in my line of work, I'd learned to look beyond the obvious. I zoomed in on the background. A faint reflection in the yacht's glass windows showed the ship's name, the Sea Whisperer. That was enough. I called Anthony Vega. "Tony, I've got a lead." Yacht called, the Sea Whisperer. "I want ownership records, manifests, anything you can dig up," he whistled low. "Give me 24 hours. People think yachts don't leave a trail, but every harbor logs arrivals and departures." The next day, Anthony handed me a folder over coffee. "Your boy's been busy." That yacht? Rented through a shell company tied to Richard's business accounts. Paid for on March 8th, with funds withdrawn directly from Emily's trust account. I opened the folder, my chest burning. "He used her money?" "Every penny," Anthony said grimly, "and it gets better." The woman in the photo, not just a fling, she's listed as the VP of marketing for one of his subsidiary companies. He's been funneling company funds to cover personal trips with her for months. I tapped the photo with my finger, the edges curling under my grip. Arrogance! He left this right in the open. Anthony smirked. "And arrogance is admissible in court if you package it right." That night, I documented everything in my notebook. March 11th, 2025. Photos posted online of Richard, on yacht, the Sea Whisperer with mistress. Payments traced to Emily's trust account. Woman identified as employee of his subsidiary company. Evidence of fraud and marital misconduct. But photos and financial leaks weren't enough on their own. I needed corroboration. So I started visiting people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends in the department, harbor masters, even a local dock worker who remembered my badge. One, a wiry man named Carl, flipped through the photos I showed him. "Yeah, I saw him. Docked here 2 nights ago, big spender, didn't even try to hide it. Guy bragged to everyone that his wife was sick, but he deserved a break." My stomach clenched. "He said that?" Carl nodded. "Swear on it. I'll sign a statement if you need one." Piece by piece, Richard's polished mask was cracking. To the world, he was still the successful businessman, the devoted husband spinning tales of grief. But beneath, he was a man who siphoned money from his dying wife, paraded a mistress in public, and laughed about it while sipping champagne on stolen funds. When I showed the evidence to Linda Harper, she didn't even look surprised. "This will be gold in court. Judges don't like fraud, but they hate hypocrisy. We'll use this to undermine his custody petition and his credibility. He wants to play the role of stable parent? We'll show them the yacht, the mistress, and the money trail." I nodded, though inside I was still seething. This wasn't about legal points. It was about Emily, about Lily, about Margaret's memory. Richard thought he could rewrite the story while we sat silent in hospital rooms. But stories leave traces, and he was writing his downfall in neon letters across social media. That night, sitting by Emily's bed, I leaned close and whispered, "He thinks you can't see him, Em. He thinks you'll never know what he's done. But when you wake up, you'll see the truth. I'll make sure of it." Her hand didn't move. Her eyes stayed closed. But I held on to the faintest squeeze I thought I felt in her fingers. Maybe it was hope playing tricks. Maybe it was real. Either way, it steeled me. The yacht wasn't just evidence. It was the symbol of his arrogance, and arrogance always sinks faster than the strongest ship. When I retired from the force, I promised myself I'd never lean on the badge again. I'd spent 3 decades watching good men burn out chasing cases that chewed them up. I wanted peace, quiet evenings with Margaret, weekends teaching Emily how to ride her bike, summers watching Lily grow. But life has a way of pulling you back into old patterns when the stakes are too high to ignore. By the time I had the yacht evidence in hand, I knew Richard's game wasn't just greed. It was escalation. Fraud, forgery, custody petitions. All of it pointed to a man who believed he could rewrite reality with money and lawyers. To beat him, I needed more than whispers and screenshots. I needed leverage. Real leverage. So I picked up the phone and started calling favors I hadn't touched in years. Anthony Vega was first. My old partner never said no when I needed him, and he didn't start now. "Frank," he said, "you sound like a man gearing up for war. What do you need?" "I need surveillance," I told him. "I want to know where Richard goes, who he talks to, what he hides. And I don't want him knowing he's being watched." Anthony chuckled. "You think I've gotten rusty?" "I'll put eyes on him. And Frank, don't forget, I owe you. You saved my skin back in '97 when that drug case went sideways. Time I paid you back. The next call was harder. I dialed Detective Marla Jensen, a woman half my age but twice as relentless when it came to white-collar crime. She owed me nothing, but when she picked up and heard my voice, she softened. "Frank Doyle," she said. "I thought you were out fishing somewhere." "Wish I was," I said, "but I've got a son-in-law knee-deep in fraud, and I need someone inside the department to make sure the right eyes land on the right files when the time comes." She was quiet a moment, then said, "Send me what you've got. If it's clean, I'll push it up without your name attached." I thanked her, knowing what it cost her to even say that much. Finally, I reached out to Grace Ramirez. She wasn't just a forensic accountant. She was the kind of woman who saw through numbers like X-rays through bone. She met me at a diner, her laptop already open, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Frank, your instincts were right," she said, spinning the screen toward me. "Richard has been siphoning Emily's trust funds for nearly a year. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, disguised as business expenses. I can map the transfers. It's textbook fraud. I studied the lines of code and charts on her screen." "Will it hold up in court?" She smirked. "Frank, this isn't just a paper trail. It's a neon sign flashing guilty. When we put this in front of a judge, he'll wish he'd stayed on that yacht permanently." Piece by piece, the net was tightening. Anthony's surveillance logged Richard's late-night meetings with the woman in the red dress. Grace traced thousands in fraudulent wire transfers. Marla whispered from inside the department that Richard's name was popping up in unrelated investigations, whispers of bribery, tax evasion, and worse. And through it all, I kept documenting in my notebook. Each entry steadied me, kept the cop in me disciplined instead of vengeful. March 15th, 2025. Richard under surveillance. Meeting mistress at hotels. Funds traced offshore by Grace. Detective Jensen monitoring department files. Case building. Still, what haunted me most wasn't the fraud or the arrogance. It was Emily. Every time I sat by her hospital bed, listening to the beeps of those machines, I wondered if she'd ever wake up to see what he had tried to do to her. One night, Carla pulled me aside. "Frank, you should know. Richard's been asking about her insurance policies. Not medical treatment. Insurance. He wanted copies of the payout clauses if she doesn't make it." I felt my blood run cold. That was when I knew Richard wasn't just exploiting Emily's illness. He was waiting for her to die. And maybe, just maybe, he was trying to hurry it along. I went home that night, poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't need, and sat in the dark. Margaret's photo sat on the mantel, her smile frozen in time. I stared at it and whispered, "I can't let him win. Not while Emily breathes, not while Lily needs me." The next morning, I called Anthony. "Change of plans. I don't just want his accounts or his yacht. I want everything. Phone taps, hidden cameras, background checks on every employee he's got. He thinks he's invisible. Let's show him what real surveillance looks like." Anthony didn't hesitate. "Done. You just gave me the green light." For the first time in months, I felt like the detective I used to be. Not a grieving father, not a broken widower, a man with a case, and Richard Carson was my prime suspect. Building a case is like weaving a net. Each strand on its own isn't strong enough to hold anything, but weave them together, knot them tight, and you can catch even the slipperiest prey. Richard Carson had been slipping through loopholes, hiding behind lawyers, and burying his crimes under luxury. But the strands were tightening, and soon the net would close. Grace Ramirez invited me to her office one evening after hours. The building was quiet, the hum of computers filling the space. She had charts pinned on the wall, strings of red yarn connecting bank accounts, shell companies, and offshore transfers. It looked like something out of a crime drama, but for Grace, it was just Tuesday. She pointed at a series of arrows. "Here, Richard siphoned $200,000 from Emily's trust account last fall. He disguised it as consulting fees to a firm in the Cayman Islands. That firm doesn't exist. It's just a mailbox." I leaned closer. "Where did the money go?" Grace clicked her mouse, pulling up another window. "Here. Direct deposit to a private brokerage account under the name of his mistress, Lauren Reed. Vice President of Marketing, technically. Mistress, realistically. She's been the funnel for everything." The name hit me like a punch. Now the woman in the red dress had a name, a salary, and a role in his empire of fraud. Grace continued, her voice calm, methodical. "It doesn't stop there. Look at these transfers. Multiple payments disguised as educational funds for Lily. Except the account numbers don't belong to any school. They belong to Richard's personal credit lines. He's stealing from his own daughter under the guise of providing for her future." My jaw clenched. I thought of Lily's freckles, her stuffed rabbit, the way she spun in my chair, laughing. To think Richard would strip her future before she even had a chance to grow into it. That was a rage I had to swallow down just to breathe. Grace saw my hands tightening into fists. "Frank," she said gently, "we'll get him. But you need patience. Every transfer I document, every fraudulent memo I trace, it makes the net tighter. And when it's ready, it'll strangle him." I nodded, forcing myself to steady. Meanwhile, Anthony Vega's surveillance was bearing fruit. He called me late one night, his voice low and excited. "Frank, you won't believe this. I've got Richard on tape. Hotel bar talking to Lauren. He told her, and I quote, 'Once Emily's gone, we're in the clear. The insurance money comes through and Lily's trust is mine to manage.' The words cut through me like glass. He wasn't just waiting for Emily to die. He was planning his life around it. "Send me the file," I told Anthony. My voice was cold, the detective's voice I thought I'd buried. The next day I sat in my study listening to the recording on repeat. Richard's voice, smug and careless, filled the room. Each time I heard it, I wrote another note in my journal. March 18th, 2025. Surveillance confirms Richard speaking of Emily's death as financial opportunity. Mistress present. Fraudulent transfers traced to her accounts. The evidence was piling up faster than I had imagined. Fraud, embezzlement, marital misconduct, conspiracy. It was enough to bury a man 3 times over. But what haunted me wasn't the fraud. It was the timing. Carla told me Richard had been pressing doctors to reduce Emily's therapies, citing expenses and quality of life. I didn't need to spell it out to see the truth. He was positioning her death as both inevitable and desirable. That evening I walked the pier behind my house, the bay dark and restless. Margaret's photo sat heavy in my pocket, a reminder of the promises I'd made her. "He's killing her slowly, Maggie," I whispered, "and he thinks no one sees it. But I see it. I'll stop him. I swear I will. The forensic net was nearly complete. Grace was finalizing her financial reports, Anthony was collecting tapes, and Marla was keeping the department primed for when I dropped the hammer. Richard thought money could erase the truth, but the truth was patient. The truth was stubborn, and once woven together, the truth became unbreakable. For weeks, I'd told myself Richard was a leech, a thief, a liar, but not a killer. I wanted to believe that Emily's accident was just bad luck, that her collapse was the tragic byproduct of stress and negligence. But the deeper I dug, the harder it was to hold on to that lie. Richard wasn't just waiting for my daughter to die, he was pushing her toward it. Anthony Vega was the first to nudge me across that line. He came to my house late one night, dropping a thumb drive on my desk. "You need to hear this." I plugged it in and pressed play. Grainy audio filled the room. Richard's voice, low and smug, speaking to Lauren Reed. The brakes failed perfectly. Timing couldn't have been better. She was alone, and now she's laid up in the hospital. If she doesn't pull through, the payout's massive. If she does, she'll never walk the same again. Either way, I win. The words punched the air from my lungs. My daughter's car accident, the one that had left her clinging to life, wasn't an accident at all. I pressed stop, my hands trembling. "You're telling me he tampered with her car?" Anthony's eyes were hard. We checked the repair logs. 2 weeks before Emily's crash, Richard paid cash to a mechanic in town, under the table. No invoice, no official record, but the guy remembers him. Said Richard insisted on routine brake checks. My stomach turned. He tried to kill her. Anthony's silence was confirmation enough. I sat there for a long time, staring at Margaret's photo on the mantel. She'd always said Emily was stubborn like me, strong like her. But strength doesn't stop a car from spinning out when the brakes fail, and Richard had counted on that. The next day, Carlin Guyen pulled me aside in the hospital hallway. Her face was pale, her voice urgent. "Frank, I shouldn't be telling you this, but Richard asked Dr. Shaw about altering Emily's medication. He suggested reducing her blood thinners, said it was prolonging her suffering." Shaw refused, but he's under enormous pressure from administration. It felt like the walls were closing in. Richard wasn't just sabotaging her life outside the hospital. He was trying to finish the job inside it, too. I documented every word. March 20th, 2025. Audio confirms Richard admitting to brake tampering. Carla reports pressure to alter meds. Pattern of attempted murder evident. Grace Ramirez took it further. She uncovered an insurance policy, a hidden one, that Emily hadn't known about. Richard had taken it out less than a year earlier, naming himself sole beneficiary. Value, $2 million. She slid the file across the diner table. "Frank, this wasn't about love. It was about liquidation. Your daughter was just another asset to him." I felt something crack inside me. Rage, grief, helplessness, all of it mixing into a resolve harder than steel. That night, I drove to the impound lot, where Emily's wrecked car still sat. The guard knew me from my years on the force, and after some quiet persuasion, he let me in. The car looked like a ghost of itself. Crumpled hood, shattered windshield. I opened the driver's side door and crouched inside with a flashlight. The brake lines told a story. Clean cuts, too precise to be wear and tear. I photographed everything, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. As I stood in the cold lot, staring at the broken machine that had almost killed my daughter, I whispered into the night, "You overplayed your hand, Richard. You thought you could make her death look like fate. But fate didn't cut these lines. You did." By the time I left, I knew one thing. The case had shifted. This wasn't just fraud, forgery, or custody theft. This was attempted murder, and I was no longer just a father seeking justice. I was a detective again, chasing a killer. I had promised myself for weeks I wouldn't break. I would gather the evidence, stack the pages in my notebook, and let the law do its work. But every man has a line. Mine was crossed when I heard Richard bragging about Emily's accident, like it was a business deal that went perfectly. It was late afternoon when I spotted him outside the hospital. He strolled across the parking lot in his tailored suit, phone to his ear, laughing like he didn't have a care in the world. A few nurses walked past, whispering, their eyes down. He looked like a man in control, but he wasn't, not anymore. I stepped out from between two cars and cut across his path. He stopped, eyebrows raised. "Frank, what a surprise." "Not a surprise," I said evenly. "We need to talk." He smirked. "If this is about visitation, you'll need to take it up with my attorney." "I'm not here to talk about visitation." I pulled a small recorder from my coat pocket and clicked it on. "I'm here to talk about breaks." His smirk faltered for the briefest moment. He covered it quickly, chuckling. "Breaks? You've lost me, old man." I took a step closer. "No, you don't look lost. You look nervous. You paid a mechanic cash to tamper with Emily's car. You bragged about it to your mistress. I have the recording. I have photos of the brake lines. And I have enough witnesses to bury you 6 feet deep in prison orange." His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed smooth. "You've been listening to too many rumors. You've always been paranoid, Frank. Maybe it's age catching up. With you," I leaned in, lowering my voice to a growl. "Don't mistake patience for weakness. I've put men away for less than what I've got on you. Fraud, forgery, theft, insurance fraud, attempted murder. The only question now is how long you want to drag this out before everyone sees what you are." He stepped closer, his smile gone. "You wouldn't risk Emily finding out. She wakes up and learns her father has been spying on her husband? That'll break her." I stared at him, my fists curling at my sides. "Emily won't break." "But you will." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then shoved it in his pocket. "You think you've got something, but you don't have me." "Not yet. And until you do, I've got custody papers, lawyers, and the hospital administration on my side. Remember that before you play hero, I let the silence hang between us, the hum of distant traffic filling the air. Then I said, heroes don't gather evidence. Detectives do. And detectives don't stop until the case is closed." For the first time, his mask slipped. The cocky grin was gone, replaced by a flicker of real fear. He turned sharply and walked away, his polished shoes striking the pavement too hard, too fast. I stood in that parking lot for a long time, breathing hard, the recorder still warm in my hand. Every instinct in me wanted to chase him, to grab him by the collar and drag him to the nearest precinct. But years on the force had taught me restraint. Anger wins battles. Evidence wins wars. And I was building a war chest that no judge could ignore. That night, back at my house, I replayed the confrontation in my head. His voice, his denial. That split-second flicker when he realized I wasn't bluffing. I wrote in my journal, March 22nd, 2025. Confronted Richard in hospital parking lot. Informed him of evidence. Audio, photos, witnesses. His reaction, denial, fear. Mask cracking. I closed the notebook and whispered to Margaret's photo on the mantel. "I rattled him, Maggie. For the first time, he knows I'm not just some old man waiting to be erased. He knows I'm coming. And the best part? He didn't know how much more I had waiting for him. The net was closing, and soon it would snap shut. The courthouse smelled of polish and paper. A place where words carried more weight than fists, where the truth had to be nailed down with evidence and witnesses instead of instinct. I'd been in plenty of courtrooms during my years as a detective, but this time was different. This time, it wasn't a suspect sitting at the defense table. It was the man who had married my daughter and nearly killed her. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Miriam Holt entered, her black robe sweeping behind her, her eyes sharp and impatient. I respected her. She had a reputation for being no nonsense, and I knew she wouldn't tolerate theatrics. That was fine. I hadn't come with theatrics. I'd come with the truth. Richard, sat across the aisle, perfectly groomed. His tie knotted just so. His lawyer whispered in his ear, but his eyes kept darting toward me. He looked smaller than he had in the parking lot, like a man trying to convince himself the mask was still intact. Our attorney, Linda Harper, rose first. Her voice was calm, her pace deliberate. Your Honor, today we present a pattern of fraud, exploitation, and attempted murder committed by Richard Carson against his wife, Emily Doyle Carson, and her father, Franklin Doyle. She laid out the foundation, the forged power of attorney, the siphoned trust funds, the yacht photos, the mistress. Piece by piece, she painted the picture. Every time she dropped a new document on the judge's desk, I saw Richard's shoulders tighten a little more. Then came the witnesses. Carla Nguyen stepped up first. She described the nights Richard tried to bring in documents, his attempts to pressure doctors, the woman in the red dress visiting Emily's room at midnight. Her voice was quiet but steady, and when Richard's lawyer tried to rattle her, she didn't flinch. Next was Anthony Vega. He played the audio recording, Richard's voice filling the courtroom. The brakes failed perfectly. Timing couldn't have been better. The words echoed through the room like a gunshot. Gasps rippled in the gallery. Richard's face drained of color. For the first time, he looked less like a man in control and more like what he really was, a criminal caught. Grace Ramirez followed, her spreadsheets projected on the screen. She traced every fraudulent transfer, every offshore account, every siphoned dollar. Her calm precision left no room for doubt. Finally, I took the stand. I had sworn I wouldn't let anger speak for me, so I kept my voice steady, my words simple. I told the judge about Emily's laughter as a child, about Lily's trust in me, about Margaret's lessons in keeping records. Then I told her about the papers, the forgery, the restrictions in the hospital. And finally, I told her about the night I saw Emily's wrecked car and the brake lines cut clean through. Richard's lawyer tried to paint me as a bitter old man clinging to relevance, but Judge Holt wasn't buying it. She leaned forward, her voice sharp. Mr. Carson, do you deny this is your voice on the recording? Richard stammered, his hands gripping the table. It's out of context. Answer the question. His silence was answer enough. By the end of the day, the case was sealed. Judge Holt's ruling was swift and merciless. Richard Carson, this court finds overwhelming evidence of fraud, forgery, and attempted homicide. Custody of Lily Carson is awarded solely to her grandfather, Franklin Doyle. Furthermore, all financial assets previously tied to Emily Doyle Carson's trust are to be restored under independent management. This case is referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Her gavel struck once, hard enough to echo through my chest. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply. For the first time since Emily's accident, I felt the weight shift off my shoulders. The war wasn't over, not until Richard faced his criminal trial. But in that courtroom, the tide had turned. When it was over, Michael... No, I stopped myself. Wrong story. Here it was Emily, my Emily, still fighting for her life upstairs in the hospital. She hadn't seen justice yet, but Lily had. As I walked out of the courthouse, Lily ran to me, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Grandpa, we won? I knelt down, pulling her into my arms. We won, sweetheart, we won. But inside, I knew the fight wasn't truly finished until Emily opened her eyes and saw that her father had kept his promise to protect her, to protect Lily, to protect the family Margaret and I had built. The weeks after the custody ruling felt like the quiet after a hurricane. The storm had torn through everything, Emily's health, Lily's innocence, my patience, but the winds had finally eased. For the first time in months, I wasn't waking each day wondering if Richard Carson would take something more from me. Instead, I was waking with a granddaughter who still laughed, and with hope that my daughter might come back to us. Emily remained in the ICU. Machines still hummed and beeped around her, the steady chorus of survival. But there were signs, small ones, that she was fighting her way back. Carla told me her vitals had stabilized, her body responding better to therapy. One afternoon, I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, and I felt her fingers twitch. Just once, but enough to make my throat tighten and my eyes burn. "Emily," I whispered, "you've always been tougher than anyone gave you credit for. Don't stop now. Lily needs you. I need you." Lily visited with me almost every evening. She would bring her stuffed rabbit, placing it gently on her mother's chest. "Mommy, Bun-Bun's keeping you company," she would say softly. Watching her innocence press against all that machinery was a cruel kind of beauty. She didn't understand betrayal, fraud, or attempted murder. She just wanted her mom to wake up. At home, the house felt alive again. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator. Her laughter echoed down the hallway Margaret once filled with her humming. At night, I would tuck her in and tell her stories about her mom as a little girl, about Emily climbing trees barefoot, about the time she tried to bake cookies without flour, about how she once swam so far off the pier I nearly dove in after her. Lily would giggle, clutching her rabbit, and whisper, "That sounds like Mommy." Yes, it did. Richard was gone from our lives. After Judge Holt's ruling, the district attorney moved fast. Fraud, forgery, attempted homicide, each charge stacked heavier than the last. His lawyer quit within a week. I heard through Anthony that Richard had tried to bargain, offering information on other schemes in exchange for leniency. But no one wanted his deals anymore. His yacht was impounded, his company gutted, his mistress gone. He was a man unraveling exactly as he deserved. But victory doesn't always taste sweet. It's bittersweet. Because Margaret wasn't here to see it, and Emily still hadn't opened her eyes to witness justice served in her name. Some nights I sat on the porch after Lily was asleep, listening to the bay, sipping cold coffee and whispering to Margaret's photo. "Maggie, I kept my promise. I protected her. I protected Lily. He won't hurt them again." One evening, weeks later, Carla met me in the hall, outside the ICU, with tears in her eyes. For a moment my heart stopped, but then she smiled. "She's awake, Frank." Emily opened her eyes. I don't remember walking into the room. I just remember the moment. Her eyes, weak but open, staring at me. Her lips moved, dry and cracked, but the word came out clear enough. "Dad." I fell into the chair beside her bed, clutching her hand like a drowning man grabbing a rope. "Emily, you're safe. You're safe." Her brow furrowed faintly. "Lily?" I pressed her hand to my lips. "With me." "She's with me. She's safe." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She didn't have strength for more words, but she didn't need them. She knew, and in that moment, I knew the fight had been worth every sleepless night, every page of my notebook, every ounce of fury I'd had to swallow. Weeks later, when Emily was transferred to a rehab facility, Lily and I decorated her new room with roses, Margaret's favorite. We taped Lily's drawings on the wall and placed Bun-Bun on the bed beside her pillow. Slowly, Emily regained her strength. Slowly, her voice grew stronger. One afternoon, she looked at me and whispered, "You saved me." I shook my head. "No, you saved yourself. I just cleared the path." But deep down, I knew Margaret would have said the same thing, that fathers aren't supposed to be heroes, just steady hands guiding their children through storms. Now, months later, I sit on the porch with Emily and Lily beside me. The bay stretches out calm, the gulls circle overhead, and the house feels whole again. Richard's shadow is gone. What remains is love, scarred but unbroken. Legacy isn't money or property. It isn't trust funds or deeds. It's the laughter of a granddaughter on a summer night, the steady recovery of a daughter who refused to be erased, and the memory of a wife who taught us all how to endure. I close my notebook for the last time. The final entry written in bold, April 30th, 2025. Richard Carson removed from our lives. Emily awake, Lily safe. Family restored. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe.